Hello and welcome to UX Leadership by Design. I am your host, Mark Baldino. I also happen to be a partner at Fuzzy Math, the user experience design consultancy that brings consumer grade UX to B2B and the enterprise. If you have a complicated business application that needs better usability, we are your firm. Today's guest is Shan Shen, who is a principal UX designer at Custom Inc. And we cover a lot. First and foremost, is going to be very clear that she has a passion for advocating for her team of creatives and a recognition that many of us have, but don't always talk about, that being a creative is difficult and it's really draining. Maybe it looks fun from the outside, but it can be really, really hard. And we're living in difficult times. And sometimes the people on our teams don't always have the tools or the space to work through things. And we really need to clear that space and help them navigate difficult situations and kind of be there for them. And, there's also this shift in maybe the role of designers, where they're being asked to do things that are more challenging, more strategic. One of those is aligning their work with overall business success and how they can contribute to the business health and success of their organization. And that's a lot. And so we just kind of cover what are some tips and tricks and ways that we as design leaders can help bridge the gap between design and business. And so between those two topics, like I said, we cover a lot, but it's a really enjoyable conversation. So thank you as always for listening and enjoy. Shen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
No, thank you for joining us. Very excited about our conversation today. As I do with all of the guests, I know you're a principal UX designer at Custom Inc. I would love to know kind of your background in design, how you got to this role, maybe some of your roles and your job responsibilities at your current position.
Sure. In my current role, I'm a principal product designer at Custom Inc. It's a company that's focusing on creating custom products for organizers and organizations to engage with their communities, promote their brand, and also really helping people to bring their ideas to life. And in my previous role, I'm a designer by training. So in the past roles, I've been in the product design space for a variety of industries. Transportation with Lyft, video conferencing with Blue Jeans by Verizon, and a few other numerous roles. What brought me back to my current role is a deep compassion for bringing creativity to the powerful customer experiences that we can enable for people and their communities they're in.
Fantastic.
And I'm really excited for our podcast to talk about a few more topics in detail.
Yeah, great. What was the transition like from being a designer to being, a principal or a lead? It's a big gap for a lot of folks to go from I design and that is my biggest contribution in a role to I now lead teams and people and I'm responsible for kind of a bigger picture. What was that transition like for you? What were maybe some of the challenges that you encountered? How'd you overcome those?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. It always is a great joy and also gives me a little bit of discomfort to reflect on my transition as how much is it relevant to the other designers, being our audience listening to this podcast, as well as having a reflection for myself. And this transition for me took, several years. And I would say that a good part of my transition from a senior to a leadership role is during pandemic, which is different and everything is all remote. But some of the challenges that I came along the way is one, understanding my unique design skills and how that is relevant to create experiences for the people that I care about and organizations that I care about, the business models I am passionate to propel forward, and also have a deeper understanding of detach myself and my values to learn about the other creatives, other designers, architects, researchers, content designers. You know that the principle it has really expanded broadly in our industry that people are bringing their really unique assets and skills and knowledge to the table. And that allows me to see so much broader and bigger and also bring me to the passion of hey, this is something that I'm passionate about into the leadership role because I can enable those skills to play a much bigger impact to the business.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. What's the secret here? I mean, that's a large sort of variety in backgrounds and skill sets and passions for those people that you're either working with or leading. Like, what's it sounds like a balancing act. What's the key to that balancing act?
Acknowledgement
Hmm.
and self-awareness. I think that's
Yeah.
more so in the core center of everything is that always knowing that someone has a different perspective bringing to the table that creates value that um, compensates to each other, helps to bring a multiplier to what we can do and great things that we can do together. And that allows me to really lean on that level of collaboration of also learning about disciplines and understanding how that approach is different from a typical designer by training that is very much focused on the crafts and um, creation part of the experience.
Yeah. I think self awareness you mentioned, and the sense of being empathetic towards the folks that we work around is not always it's not always easy. And you mentioned sort of the pandemic, like shifting to a remote world. Sometimes those in person cues, those in person relationships, you either have to kind of relearn how to work with people in a remote setting, or maybe it's the first time you're working with someone you've never actually sat in the same room, and it requires work on the part of leaders to figure out the best way to leverage the talents and the passions of the people that they work with. And we're creators as designers. Yeah, I think from the outside it looks sometimes like a lot of fun, and it is a lot of fun. But there's a lot of sort of challenges that come to being in a creative role and what it requires. And I know one of your passions is kind of advocating for designers and people in creative roles because it is a bit of a challenge. And I think people who haven't lived it maybe don't have that same level of understanding. They haven't maybe walked in the roles of a creative. Again, at the outside, being a creative looks like very, very exciting, but it's really kind of it can be a very draining career because you're asked to give a lot. So I'd kind of love to hear your thoughts again. Like I know you've mentioned this is something you're passionate about.
Absolutely, and I'm really glad that we're talking about it because, as we know, like when we are looking at the career development and career in at large for a creative role, we kind of have to separate ourselves of looking at it pre-pandemic and what happens
Mm.
during pandemic when remote has played such a prominent role on our ways of working and connecting with others for that part of learning. And the designers are really struggling, and especially the designers who either by the traditional way of training that go into the design schools and put them through a long training path of learning the design skills, including those designers who are breaking into the UX that don't have a typical design background, possibly in
Mhm.
engineering, product research, and starting to pick up their creative skills. And there's a variety of trainings out there through boot camps and more to help them ease into the UX and creative part. And one of the things that didn't get really emphasized and um, supported for those designers is that they don't have that support network
Mm.
that allows them to feel that when they're giving, they're also being rewarded and being valued by the things that they create. And I think that's a big missing part that is worth to it's worth for us to talk more about to recognize that.
You feel like this is the pandemic or the remote work has kind of exacerbated these situations, made them more significant. It's difficult to work in that environment. Do you think the support systems were there in person and then kind of gone remote, or it's just you're seeing the kind of negative consequences a little bit more because it's in a remote setting?
I think in the beginning of the pandemic, I'm seeing more of the negative consequences of it because that connection is completely through um, gone remote through meetings, countless meetings, through chats, and that doesn't give you a sense of you can just come over to the senior designer, have a shoulder surfing on something you wanted to gain some clarity and like learn through that in-person practice. And now that coming out of the pandemic, as we are looking at into the 2024, that a lot of workplaces are incorporating this return to office or hybrid working styles. I think that is becoming less of a negative factor, but also being more encouraging for designers who are in a junior or mid-level positions to develop that in-person skills through that in-person time.
Yeah. I would like to talk about some things that advice you offer to designers, but before we go there, what are your recommendations for leaders to create these spaces to watch out for burnout, to help people have the support network? Like, what do you advocate for? What do you do with your team to sort of help ease some of the challenges that creatives have?
As a leader, I'll say that one of the missteps that I've seen that happens over and over again, and myself being part of it as well, because I literally take on leadership responsibilities when during pandemic, and that I did not know that the way that you manage a design team or manage a team of remote designers is completely different from managing a team of in-house designers. And that missed the step is to have a more intuitive sense of somebody who is not feeling great about what they do.
Mm.
And that brings down to the designers maybe not even seeking help at that moment, but just not feeling valued for what the work that they're putting out. That when you're asking them, hey, what is the aspect of the work you have been doing that makes you feel proud? And often that fades into a moment of silence that the designers don't feel that they are attached and feeling great about what they do. And they're more so in that producer mindset of, okay, what is the next where I'm up to deliver and what is everybody else expecting from me, including their peers, their stakeholders, partners, and etc. And that is a sign that I wanted to bring to awareness for a broader sense of a community, especially for design leaders out there to um, gain a sense of that awareness that your team is probably not feeling great at the moment and they're not being extremely verbal about that because they don't even know what is the appropriate way to talk about it.
Right. So you have to create this space. You mentioned being intuitive about it, but I mean that requires a focus from a leader and you know, frankly, paying attention to some of the signals. I think it's interesting you just mentioned that like designers might not even know that they're going through something that's a bit of a challenge, or they don't necessarily know how they feel, or no one's kind of asking them. So I like the idea of focus on what's rewarding to you, what are you finding value in, and then as a leader trying to create some space. Are there tips you have for designers to sort of the onus isn't fully on them, but
Mm-hmm.
people talk a lot about sort of self-care and taking care of oneself. And, I think there's a dynamic, right? Is it 100% on the employer or leaders to ensure self-care? Is it 100% on the team? Or on the team member, there's a balance, right? It's a shared responsibility. How do you help the folks you lead sort of be more in touch with kind of how they're feeling, express how they're feeling? Are there tips to help them like sort of navigate difficult times or difficult situations?
Yeah, good question. There's definitely a dual effort that um, the leaders and the, let's say, individual contributors who take on the hands-on work needs to meet in the middle and help each other to understand what is that space looking like for a more founded trust from both parties
Mm,
to talk about things that are challenging. So from a individual contributor perspective, my suggestions for designers is one, give yourself permission that you're not gonna be perfect in
mm,
your professional self, but being authentic with yourself and being able to reflect on what is not great in your experience is really important, and try to distill that feelings out of something that can be more objectively talked about. So when you're saying coming to your leaders and engaging with a conversation of, hey, can I just grab 5 minutes of you from the hallway to talk about something through or some ideas I have in mind? and they are able to verbalize what exactly are the challenges they are facing. And so the leaders are able to grasp onto it, because as
Mm.
you are more developing your leadership path, you're also more disconnected from understanding how this person would feel in that very position in that moment of life. So helping to clarify, bring that clarity to the conversation is really important for a designer, and that we can go into details about how to navigate that technical situation.
Yeah.
And then from a design leader's perspective, I would say that um, it's it's really important to um, still put yourself out there and be available. And
Mm.
that's really difficult because the design leader is responsible for results, for outcomes, to structure the team, to focus on the productivity of the team. And that is extremely difficult, and I'll say it's underevaluated across the board in the state of the economic state in the tech industry. But I would still say that as a design leader, still put yourself in the position of being available to support another, and just lend a pair of ears to listen is
Yeah.
fundamental. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's good advice. It sounds simple, but as you said, it's hard because if somebody's not raising a hand or speaking up or expressing, challenges they're going through, it's very easy as a leader. I am guilty of this at times to think everything's fine, and to kind of be like, "Oh, we're good," but actually, that might not be the case under the surface. And so you kind of not that you have to pry, but you have to always be open to it and continually make yourself available. And it is, you mentioned trust. It's a lot of building trust, and that's not something that happens quickly or easily. But when you've had a conversation as a leader and you've you listen attentively, as you said, if you help them navigate a situation, add a few of those together, you can start to build trust, and they can know that it's people use the term safe space a lot these days, but that there's a sense that they can come to you with bigger challenges or different challenges, and you're going to, help them navigate them, which I think is a really good. You're not solving it for them. I think it's a really nice phrase to say you're helping them navigate that situation.
Yes, absolutely. And I say that probably, and I'm interested in hearing your perspective on it, on what are the ways that can navigate the team to build the safety and trust in space, especially that today it's so dynamically different that from one team to another, and also bigger team and small teams, they have a different leverage of how they can build trust and more practically. And one thing that does come to me really strongly is that the conversational piece, that no matter what, you are open to having a conversation of talking things through instead of having each other to internalize what's difficult in their mind. And over time, that just creates a much bigger roadblock for the team to navigate and come through.
Yeah, I think when I'm meeting with team members, like a skill I've learned over time is to listen a lot more than to talk, because I feel like leader of any organization, give them, if they are they're the head or they're the leader, they're the manager, they're above others in the hierarchy. We're gonna fill the void of talking and speak, and always feel like you have to have an answer. And I think when we're talking about issues that are about human beings and what they're going through day in and day out, it's not really about having an answer. It's about listening and being empathetic towards what they're going through. I have a pretty I'm a process oriented person. Try to be pretty analytical. Sometimes that really that kind of flies in the face of just stopping and listening, because I hear something and I'm like, okay, let's problem solve, let's go, and that's not what people need. Maybe
Yeah.
there's a time for that, but it's generally about listening and understanding, and then enabling them to maybe take control of a situation, to figure out what's, one thing I've tried a lot not to do too much like human psychology, but like, what's the underlying issue here? What do you think is actually causing you to have this sometimes very visceral response to a client or a teammate, right? And instead of trying to problem solve for them, it's like, what are you actually going through? What is this causing you? What are you struggling with? I'm not asking to go into their background or childhood or history, but like, this is a situation, it's causing a very distinct response. You're struggling in this situation. Help me understand, and then it's about allowing them to at times I don't sit with difficult situations and work through it as opposed to taking them out of it, but give them the support that they need to get through it. Because I do believe that some of the challenging times that my team members have gone through, they've also grown and learned a lot,
Hmm.
and that's a valuable part of working. And obviously, if it's a too challenging a situation that they can't navigate through, then it is removal. But I think a lot of times it's giving them the support to get through it and being patient with them. And I think, as you said, enabling them to give themselves some space. I like to say, give yourself some grace here in this situation. You're trying very hard, and maybe you made a mistake, or this is a challenging time. But you are human, and your head is in the right place, your heart is in the right place. Just give yourself a little bit of space here to kind of get through it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love your perspective on it. And two things that I just wanted to say that I really appreciate and I think exactly the same way is one, being able to listen. So like switching the leader's mindset of like, tell me about your problem. I'm all in to help you solve it.
Yeah,
And be like, step that way and be like, hey, just walk me through the difficult situation in more detail so I can feel what you feel and see in your lens. And that's absolutely resonating with me. And the other thing that you just mentioned on is creating that space, because everybody is different. And when you, from a leader's perspective, when you see something that's not too hard to overcome, can be incredibly difficult for the other person. And maybe that is also relating to understanding, is it really about a problem that you have encountered in the work that needs to more clarity and help? Or is it something about the personal challenges that as you are navigating a professional path that you have to overcome? And where your value is contradictory in a positional moment that um, makes you feel that drag, that because something you have to put forward isn't something that aligns with your personal values, and you feel like by doing so you're being discounted for something you believe in. That is really, uh, it's a lot to think about.
yeah. No, it is. And I think, not just the remote world, but I feel like the role of design has has changed over the past 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And we're asking designers to do more than just design, right? And for UX designers, research has always been part of the process. But if there's a trend in design or fear of designers, it's the commoditization of design. It's what is any role, but what's AI going to do to our role? And are we, is it taking away some of the skills that we used to apply? And the way I've advocated for my design team is to say that, you know, our role in organizations at times has been tactical. And if we want to contribute moving forward and not be commoditized, we need to be more strategic. And part of that is thinking about the business and being more involved in the business and thinking, not just about users and designs, but how does this organization make money? And I think that places a lot of stress on designers because it's kind of a different skill set. It's not something you're going to learn in school, but I know it's something you have sort of experience with, which is helping design be more impactful in organizations. And I'm kind of curious your take on that. Like, what do you see as the role of design in a more strategic or business oriented environment? What do you think are some of the challenges for leaders who are leading through that? What are some of the challenges maybe for designers as well? Too long of a
There's so
question,
much.
maybe. Too many
I
thoughts.
love the question, and there is so much to unpack because there's so many layers in this to
Yeah.
even like each of them to expand on. And what comes to my mind in a very brief way is that as design leaders, we need to recognize that we're leading the business, propel the business to generate value for the business before we come to talk about the merits of design.
Mm,
And in a recent speaking opportunity that I have with Alfred and
yeah.
with Rosenfeld Media, we talked about how to translate the language of UX into the business setting so that the broader audience that don't typically work with UX, such as, well, we will leave engineering folks because they know UX. I will assume that. But for those other business functions that are not so close to that domain can also understand the language and what we care about and what the challenges and approaches to solve the problem that allows us to align and coordinate our efforts to make a more informed business decision. And that's really something that is difficult and dragging for the designers because even when you look at that Venn diagram of what the encompassing and successors for the designers to encompass those skills, it's usually like technology, product design. Where does that business fit in? Like it doesn't share that level of clarity. And then when you look at the establishment of the design process of discovery, iterate, validate, and then that also doesn't bring a lot of clarity in terms of how that business influence each step of the way. And so that is a big challenge for designers to kind of shift the mindset and always remind ourselves that you're here to help make a business decision, and everything will come down to from a qualitative value into a quantitative measurement of metrics and numbers into the business balance sheet, and which part are you actually influencing on and which part you are unique to make an impact on.
So do you advocate that designers sort of shift how they talk about design, or is it that you encourage them to embrace the language of business, or maybe it's kind of meeting in the middle? Like what's the advice in the shift of how we communicate as designers to better align with the business?
Yeah, great question. So two things, or maybe three. Maybe I'll go off the track and you will bring me back. Is language is really the first step. Making sure that you speak the language that the other person also being able to speak, like sharing the same dialect, if I will, is the first step to establishment and frame your problems and solutions in the same lens. And that enables a broader lens of how are we approaching this problem in a way that allows us to make progress. So that's one. Language is the start. And secondly is being able to not get too attached to just the design approach, because design is a big D that encompasses a lot of things. So don't shy away of leaning towards, let's say, designers should code. Yeah, go ahead and learn about web development. Or designers should understand the business part of data and data analytics to take a bit of more approach on understanding how that data plays into those decisions. Yes, lean to that. And also being able to walk around you. And that's very hard to grasp on because everyone, now we're all sitting in front of Zoom, in front of webcam all the time. So what does that mean to work around that? Being able to connect with other disciplines to understand, hey, am I seeing the problem you're saying? Are we also coming to bring our effort together so you can bring your skills and my skills to see what does that compounding effort will look like if we bring ourselves together? And can we coordinate even on the KPIs and performances so that we can understand we're motivated in a coordinated way so that my effort is not canceling your effort out. And a lot of those requires designers to not about designing, but about to going out and engage with other functions. So that that's leaning towards the step 3 so that we can really see how design is so embedded as a part of the business, and everything is about design, but also everything is not just about design.
Yeah. I think that's like a great summary that it feels like everything's about design, but everything's not about design is a fantastic way to wrap it up, because I think it's very easy as a designer, and other disciplines feel the same way, right? If you're a developer,
Yeah.
everything's about the technology and implementation, and you kind of come into an environment with that's your bent, that's how you feel strongly about it. But I really love the advice that you have, which is where's the common language? What are common terms we can use? How can we speak the same language? And then there's kind of a little bit of a shift when you start talking about KPIs, which is how do we then leverage maybe some language or some concepts that other groups are familiar with, how they measure success, and how can we tie design success to those? Because that's ultimately, I think, what's important is that for design to be impactful, it has to have an understanding of how it's going to impact business metrics and business KPIs. And I think those two kind of components, as challenging as it is, I think they're really required of designers in the now, but in the future, if we really want to have an impact in organizations and not feel commoditized, or that our work could be done simpler. We have to be willing to engage in these conversations, to go kind of to difficult places, to put ourselves in the shoes of other people in the room, to not just be empathetic with users. I say this all the time, but be empathetic with your coworkers. That's a really hard one. Like the product engineering, marketing, sales, executive leadership. Try to put yourself in their shoes and understand what are the challenges that they're facing. Where are they coming into this situation? What are their goals and drivers? Okay, how do we marry those with what the goals and drivers are from a design perspective? So we're all ultimately operating towards, as you said, kind of financial or business success of the organization.
Yeah, the key part of it really, and please, I would love to be challenged to think about differently because language is, it carries so much definitions. Everybody
Mm-hmm.
says it differently. So I think the language, the core part of it is talk about using the language of value, talk about
Mm-hmm.
values. Because no matter what we talk from a business perspective, from a customer perspective, essentially it boils down to what exactly is the type of value we wanted to deliver and what is the value that we wanted to commit to, and being able to ship that experience out and call that this is a love letter we have for our audience, whether that's a customer, a user, like a business. That becomes a really essential part to tie everything together, is that value language. And when designers are coming to use their language of speaking the UX jargons, and granted, that is a great, beautiful thing because now today we use very dynamic language to describe the same thing we wanted to use in the UX already, is trying to give that level of context for the non-UX partners to understand, when I'm talking about this thing particularly being used in the UX for 10 or 20 years, what am I talking about that can you understand what it is? Like, for example, we use architecture as an example.
Mm-hmm.
Because information architecture has taken such a long journey in the past 15, 20 years, that evolved so much. And today, when you just say that architecture, like if people come to that perspective in very different approaches. And I think that is like giving that level of context in your specific situation, in your specific context you're designing for, will be really valuable.
Yeah, I would agree. I think your suggestion of focusing on the value. I don't want to challenge you on it because I think you're right, and I think yes, language is important. Value can mean different things to different groups, but if we can center around, as a group, multidisciplinary team, can we center around a definition of value, and can we all try to aim towards that? I think it's a good operating principle for not just design teams and designers, but for, again, that multidisciplinary team that we're working with. So, well, on that note, we covered a lot in the past 30 minutes. I've just thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and I really do want to thank you for your time and energy, and the passion you bring to supporting creatives, to helping them work more kind of constructively within business, and learn a new skill set, and kind of, I'll say, deliver in in what is a challenging environment. Being in a business, but also just kind of the world we're living in right now is challenging. So I really appreciate the time, energy, and passion you have, and the time in the podcast today. If people want to find you, we can list out your LinkedIn profile, connect there. So again, thank you so much for your time and energy today. It was just a pleasure to communicate, and I know the audience is going to enjoy the episode today. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark.